I think you'll find a lot of what's said in the beginning of today's program to be familiar. And then we're going to talk about today's focus is on the destination, Chicago as a destination. If you missed yesterday's program, we did record it and we plan to post it on the CCAC website yesterday. So in terms of today, in just a quick second, I will be introducing Andrew Broderick, who is the president of the CCAC Burnham Council, and let me see, Andrew, a senior associate at Perkins & Will, and he is going to talk a little bit about this series and the Burnham Council. And then I'm going to hand it off to Chris Hall, a very committed CCAC member and an urban strategy leader at SOM. Following Chris's presentation, I'll have the honor of introducing our distinguished panel, and we will invite you, the audience, to use the Q&A button to submit questions, and I will do my best to get those answers asked and answered for you. So with that, Andrew, I'd like to hand it off to you to introduce yourself and talk a little bit about the Burnham Council and why we're doing this programming this week.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Kelly, and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for attending. We're excited to put together this program this week, and it's been a couple months in the making. As Kelly mentioned, I'm the president of the Burnham Council, which is the CCAC's Next Generation Leadership Group, and we're responsible for networking, programming, generating discussion and thought leadership, especially through our perspective as the next generation of leaderships across our different CCAC membership groups. And towards that end, over the past 6 months now, the Burnham Council leadership team, there's about 8 of us representing this group, have been thinking about how can we construct programming specific to addressing the needs of the central area and recognizing that the central area is at a point of inflection here in 2020. And how can we be stewards of conversation and promote programming well into 2021 and beyond that continues to carry the torch, if you will, on the future of our beloved central area. So we're happy to put together this 3-part panel, started yesterday. Today, part 2 focusing on destination, and then we'll conclude tomorrow. But by concluding tomorrow, it is just the beginning, actually, of what we're going to be doing in 2021. I think Chris will highlight that a little bit more in his discussion. So thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. And so, Chris, I know that you have a lot of important data that you can share based on the work that you largely led back in 2018 and 2019, resulting in a publication called A Central City Strategy for All of Chicago. Here we go. For our audience members, if you're not familiar with this white paper, it really had 3 focus areas: catalytic economic initiatives, new mobility, and digital connectivity for all. The white paper is available on the CCAC website under the Our Work tab. And what we're really excited about is the fact that following the publication of this white paper, we've had several actionable projects. The first was the Corridor Revitalization Initiative, where we teamed up with World Business Chicago. So Michael, that may resonate with you right now. And World Business Chicago selected 5 neighborhoods and identified community leaders. CCAC created 5 teams of CCAC members with different skill sets. The community leaders selected 2 block corridors in each of the 5 neighborhoods. And we literally went parcel by parcel and problem solved and visioned what could and should be done so that those 2 blocks were operating at their highest and best use and could be a trigger for the next 2 blocks and the next 2 blocks, etc. And we did that before Commissioner Cox was confirmed and before anybody had thought about the Invest Southwest program. And so when Commissioner Cox came to town and Invest Southwest was announced, we had completed phase 1 of the Corridor Revitalization Initiative. We were thrilled to be asked to work closely with the Chicago Department of Planning and Development, with their talented team, helping to draft the RFPs and provide renderings for development opportunities within the Invest Southwest neighborhoods. Again, all of this information can be found on the CCAC website, and if you have any specific questions, please feel free to reach out to me. But as I mentioned, all of this really started with the white paper, A Central City Strategy for All. And now we're really looking at, because the downtown has changed so dramatically because of COVID, because of the economic downturn, because of the social unrest, we're really looking at, what do we need to do to restore Chicago, to help jumpstart its growth, and to build a more inclusive economy. So with that, Chris, would you like to walk our audience through some of the important metrics that you were able to put together both in 2018 and update for today's discussion?
Sure. Thank you, Kelly. And I think that, it's worth starting with the impetus for this is really understanding that we were at a point where the city was growing very strongly and the central city was growing very strongly. And we may have been reaching the end of the business cycle, but it came as a cliff edge with the impact of the pandemic. So that has raised all kinds of questions about the future, and also led us to think about what we need to take on going forward, and ensuring that coming out of this recession and this event, that we're as competitive as we can be nationally, that we are addressing our local equity issues, that we are building on kind of some of the suggestions we worked out previously in the white paper around how we can connect central city growth and neighborhood opportunity. And then also an idea that really the most critical period is once we get beyond the immediate kind of vaccine horizon, the most critical period is going to be the 2 or 3 years of build back, because that's when we think there's the greatest opportunity for growth, and we're really setting up our long-term potential. So if you go to the next slide, there's just some headlines here. This is a quick review of some analysis that we did in 2019 to kind of understand where we were then, and then we put together some research conducted by others, CBRE, ULI, to kind of give a snapshot of where we are today. And hopefully that's a useful kind of beginning of the conversation here. So, 2 years ago, year and a half ago, we felt like we were in a boom with major initiatives, individual buildings, as well as mega projects being proposed for the central city. Next. We had seen very significant jobs growth, and the central city was really driving jobs growth for the whole of the city in terms of its scale, and a very strong track record over the preceding decade. Next. And we were also tapping into a national trend and actually an international trend. This was happening in other places, happening in Europe as well, where job growth was happening in the central cities, and we were seeing relocations, corporate relocations from suburbs into central cities. And Chicago had actually been very successful at that kind of corporate investment drive and attracting businesses to the city. Next. But we had challenges. Chicago was not growing as fast as other major metros, and also if you look internationally as other global cities. So there was a really interesting dynamic there where some of the other big markets were growing at a faster rate within particularly in terms of population, and often that was driven by the scale of their economic growth. And within Chicago itself, our own kind of dynamics, we're seeing some population loss from neighborhoods. Now, overall, we were kind of recapturing and kind of holding level in terms of population, but that was largely driven by population growth in the central city. So there were some imbalances here, but it also pointed to a reflection of that national pattern of central city growth. Next. And back then in 2019, the equity issues were there. They were really apparent. They were driving conversations. Prior to the events of this year, that really, I think, brought things into kind of a heightened focus for everybody. There was a strong sense that equity was still a challenge. Next. So where are we now? And these are very high level, but I think we've seen this graph. It could describe all kinds of metrics. So this is GDP and kind of the Conference Board's forecast for GDP, which shows GDP getting back to its January 2020 level sometime in October, sometime in 2021. It could be October. That's their central forecast. I guess what's important is we get back to a level set. So we've missed 18 months or 2 years worth of growth. That's really important for economies that are typically growing between 1 and 3% a year. That loss of growth is a significant factor. Next. And that's reflected here as well in terms of national forecast for where unemployment is likely to go. This is from the OECD. So you can see this spiking unemployment, but also then over the next couple of years, unemployment coming down, but not to the level it was prior to this event. So we've got kind of a long tail to fight our way through. Next. And then, just talk through some of the major sectors and kind of forecasts there. Office and workplace, a shift, but it's not the end. We are going back to the office. So, there is endless conversation around this. We all love to talk about it as well. But, the key message here is that offices will be the dominant location for white-collar employment in the future. And the office employment will be the largest and continue to grow as the most significant source of employment overall. So the pattern will change, but the scale will continue to grow. Next. Looking at retail, this is the great transition. This has been coming for a while. There are many trends which are coming together and have culminated and been pushed forward by this event. And significant impact at one end in terms of department stores and kind of signature stores, the flagships. I think we saw today Gap is leaving Michigan Avenue. And then at the other end, like the small business sector, which is so important to our city in terms of neighborhoods and downtown, those businesses that may only have 2 or 3 months worth of cash. And have really been impacted by this. So impact at all scales. Next. Hotel, the forecasts are for near-term pain, but ultimately a return. The travel and leisure and business travel will come back. As somebody said to me that recently, the first time you lose a deal because you didn't fly to see your client will be the last time you don't fly to see your client. So we expect that to come back. But the forecasts are the hotels may not come back until 2023. Next. Residential, kind of, the desire for changes in amenity will be really apparent. Everybody spent more time at home, so they expect more from their home. But in terms of the market, there's a major generational shift coming, with millennials really entering into their family formation years. And the next cohort coming up, Gen Z, will be a smaller cohort. So we need to think about what that means in terms of the type of housing that is offered in the central city, how we retain millennials and how we prepare for the next generation that may have different expectations. Next. And affordability continues to be an issue. There has been a national housing boom, but it hasn't generated the affordable housing necessary to meet all family income needs. Next. And equity is still a major consideration, and it is even heightened since 2019. I think this, the plan, the Recovery Task Force Advisory Report really called this out and called for a new economic model based on inclusive growth that takes a holistic approach to development across both downtown and our neighborhoods. And I think that's kind of one of the watchwords going forward. So next. So all kinds of dynamics at play right in this moment. The absence of people downtown, disruptions, accelerations across sectors or recession, which really means that there are a lot of things coming together all at once. And so we have to plan for a stronger recovery than coming out of the last recession. Next. And the way we thought about this was in terms of the recovery has to respond to the recession, but we have to think about our national.
Chris, I'm having a hard time hearing you.
Yeah, sorry. There's some construction just started next door. So, we have to ensure that we're growing, but we're also doing it in an equitable way. So next. And we also thought about the phasing of this, that there is an immediate period of activation, but then we have to focus on the period up to 2024. That's the period in which we can really maximize recovery, and then long-term think about how these long-term trends play out. Okay, so Kelly.
Okay. Well, thank you, Chris. That was, again, really helpful information. And now I'm excited to be able to introduce our distinguished panel. And as I mentioned earlier, we have Andrew Broderick, who is the president of the Burnham Council, as well as a senior associate at Perkins & Will. Lou Raisin, the president of Broadway in Chicago, and Michael Fosnot, the Chicago Chief Marketing Officer and interim president and CEO of World Business Chicago. So gentlemen, thank you for joining us today. And Michael, maybe starting with you, congratulations on the announcement of your new post. Look forward to working with you. As I mentioned, we have a long history of working with World Business Chicago, so it's very exciting. And one thing we want to do with today's discussion is we really want to focus on kind of post-vaccination. So thinking about what can we do now so that this time next year, and as Chris mentioned, between the fourth quarter of 2021 going into 2024-25, we can really accelerate growth and create this inclusive economy. So Michael, I'm going to ask, what can we do now, or what are you thinking about putting in place so that post-vaccination, we start to, quickly bring people back to the central area?
Thank you, Kelly, first of all, having me on the panel. I do have to thank my good friend Lou Raisin, because some people might not know, he is the man who brought Hamilton to Chicago. If you think about things that changing the landscape, the experiences, and bring people to the city, this is a man who talks about it as much, but he does things. And I think Hamilton, who I had the pleasure to see 3 times. So I will always thank Lou for that adventure for the rest of my life. Thank you. I do have to talk a little about the next 12 months, because I just came back from a 2-hour session with the mayor and the governor, because the vaccine and how we dealing with the vaccine will be critical for not just the next 12 months, but long term. We have to ensure that the vast majority of Chicagoans get vaccinated. And we do have some challenges on that area, because only if people get vaccinated, then can we go on the third quarter, fourth quarter, back to what I call the new normal. So I applaud everyone who's here on this call as well, I think, to get involved, to understand, to be patient, but also when the vaccine is ready to get vaccinated is critical for the recovery. I really think about 3 things post-pandemic. First is, we do always have to accept the reality of our city, the truth. I always say we are the most diverse city, but we're also the most segregated city. And how can we use, though, that's what a brand marketer does, that tension to something to our advantage. I think we have to put the diversity, the diverse experience more than ever before in the center when we talk about Chicago post-pandemic. We always had an amazing downtown, amazing central business area with amazing experiences. I think we even have a more compelling story when we tell and bring more of the neighborhoods in it, because then we really, I think, are globally almost unmatched with the breadth and depth of the experience that people are interested in. Secondly, if we look at travel overall, we talk a lot with the airlines, hotels. Business travel will not come back as easily as everyone hopes, as well as convention. But I believe there is a huge demand on leisure travel, and we have to reorient probably some of our efforts as some more public-private entity, including Choose Chicago, to be much stronger on leisure travel demand, because the demand will be tremendous, at latest in 2022, but also hopefully in the second half of next year. And we have to be ready to tell our stories, to bring leisure people here. And third, it sounds simple, but it's complicated. We have to make sure that people feel safe, people who live here and people who come here. And as you all know, we have some challenges historically. We made a very challenging year, so we're focusing a lot on to make sure that people have safe experience when they come. They feel good about that, they really venture out as much as across Chicago. We are starting on all of them, but as you can imagine, the vaccine does occupy right now quite a bit of our time and focus.
Thank you. And so I'm sorry, you said the accepting the truth, the travel, and what was the third thing?
Safety. We have to make sure, because when we look at research or so, we cannot be perceived as a city that is not safe to visit, to live, to thrive. This is the baseline. As a government, it's our job to make sure that every resident feels safe and every tourist and every person who comes in.
And just for our audience, tomorrow our third and last day of programming focuses on essential city livability, and safety is one of the key issues. And we do have a senior member from the Chicago Department of Police to kind of help address the safety issue. But I do want to get back to that safety issue from a marketing standpoint. But let's turn to Lou. And Lou, your words have resonated with me when you say that Broadway and Chicago are usually the first to close and the last to open. So again, going to my opening question, what do you think we need to be able to do now so that we can more quickly reopen our cultural, from Broadway and Chicago to all of our cultural destinations?
Well, I think first thing we need to do is understand that understand the cultural economy, that culture, culture and tourism really align one-on-one. Culture is our differentiator from a tourist standpoint. If we think about conventions and what it draws to our city, yes, they're powerful. Yes, there's an enormous amount of hotel and restaurant and other activity that spins from our convention business, but that's a mature industry. And one of the things I think the awakening that we all need on a governmental level, both from a city and state perspective, is understanding that this pandemic may have some significant impact. It's already had, but will have on an ongoing basis, a significant impact on our convention business. That mature industry has really come about. When we get another convention, it's basically we've stolen it from another city. There are few new conventions that are developed. So that mature industry, as people sit back and connect via Zoom or via telemarketing, how that impacts it is yet to be seen. But the growth opportunity is on the tourism side, on the leisure side. And that's where culture comes into play. Culture differentiates Chicago from its competitive set. And if we engage culture the way I know we can engage culture, as Michael said, there's nobody that can be put up against us. If we think about the theater world, there are 250 theaters prior to the pandemic that made up the city's theater scene. There's no other city in the world that can say that. And we'll see how many of those theaters survive the pandemic. It's been tough on everyone, but as Kelly said, we were the first industry to go down, and will, from Broadway and Chicago's standpoint, be the last to open. Because we can't, from a touring Broadway standpoint, our economic model doesn't allow us to social distance and operate at a reduced capacity. So understanding that culture drives tourism, and tourism is a significant portion of our economy, I think is incredibly important. So stressing on the vaccine, stressing on the modifications that have been made in the cultural institutions in the city from a safety perspective, from an internal environmental perspective, I think is going to give the public the kind of comfort and confidence they need. But that's going to have to be part of the marketing campaign as we reopen.
Thank you, Lou. And, in addition to culture, open space is also very important, for people when they're visiting our city. And Andrew, as an architect, would you like to talk a little bit about your thoughts on what we can or should do to create more kind of street vibrancy and open space for our visitors?
Yeah, I think, if we've witnessed over the last 10 years what's been accomplished at the Riverwalk, for instance, if we witness the programming of some of our marquee public open spaces in Grant Park, I think we see a recipe in the future by looking at the past a little bit. And what I mean by that is I think there's a real importance amongst local government in partnership with the private sector to expand open spaces, expand access, because it creates and further catalyzes the draw of coming to downtown, to coming to the central area. To highlight a couple of key investments that I think are more near term, maybe through 2024, I think the extension of the Riverwalk south to Pington Park is a big opportunity to catalyze and provide further access to the central area. I think some of the open space strategies aligned with some of the mega developments, which the 78 or the Michael Reese Hospital site, and moving further south there, I think opportunities there to provide further access and a draw or a reason to go to these different parts of our central area. So I think those are things that have been in the mix that we need to keep doing and further underscoring. But I think final point on this note is how can we rethink the public realm and think about this 2020 inflection point as a way to reinvent or think anew, especially with regards to addressing social inequality and racial injustice, and how we can be more proactive and creative in using our street life, our sidewalks, and our existing public spaces through a programming alignment and arts and culture celebrations that can help in those key areas.
Thank you.
If I may, I think the intentional placemaking in key spots will be critical. I mean, I think we'll have good news next year about the Obama Center, which moves some of the power as well further south, which is good, and hopefully will be an amazing place to visit for residents and tourists. I think the more, and I agree with Andrew, the more we think like that, I think the river, Lou is always, the first time I met Lou, he told me his vision for the river. It's completely correct. If you can expand north and south, it becomes another connective tissue for the city, which will be critical because we need to connect downtown with the neighborhoods in each neighborhood much more than before. Mm-hmm. That's a differentiator. The dream is always like, can you walk, and see something interesting as far as possible throughout the city?
I think this concept of infrastructure and the rebuilding, spending money and pushing dollars into infrastructure, I think is incredibly important. But at the same time, as we rethink infrastructure, I look, and again, I have a cultural lens on as I look at this. I think about the funding to choose Chicago, and I think of the funding to decase. In my head is infrastructure. It's building the system that allows culture to flourish and to support it. And if we think about expanding the tourism from its current nexus of Michigan Avenue and the river and drive it in every direction, that takes people into the neighborhoods. And from an infrastructure standpoint, and it's that experiential collector that are today's tourists. And that's what drives them into those other locations. So it becomes a link. Culture becomes that link, but it's going to be driven by the support that DCASE and Choose can have in the cultural world.
I think that's fair. And I think what we have, both the city and these public-private entities you mentioned, we have to highlight the more breadth of all the cultural assets we have. I think traditionally we focus too much on the white culture and the central culture. I think we neglected a lot of our amazing Black culture we have, or Latinx culture, and we have to focus more on that because it is the right thing to do and it's the attractive thing to do, because especially international tourists, they want to explore things, they want to see new things. And that is, and richness is like Lou said, Chicago's tough to beat in that.
And that's a great opening. Andrew, maybe you'd like to just briefly share with our audience the work that you and the team for Austin did around Soul City.
Yeah, I mean, in brief, we worked with the Austin community on the West Side about recognizing Austin as a gateway to Chicago and celebrating Black arts and culture as a community development driver, economic development driver for Black wealth creation, specifically along the Chicago Avenue corridor. And I think they're moving forward at the partnership between the neighborhoods and some of the institutions downtown to help. There may be maybe more symbiosis, if that's the right word, but more of a strategic partnership for some of the small undercurrents of culture that make neighborhoods very unique destinations in and of themselves, and how they could get more of a stage or presence in downtown and vice versa. Because some of the hipness and the experiential vibes in Chicago's neighborhoods, I think, speaking especially as a millennial, I think that's a main draw for our generation and probably for Gen Z as well. I don't think the future is going to look the exact same as the past. So recognizing that corollary between the neighborhoods, grassroots movements, and the downtown institutions could be an opportunity as we move forward.
Thank you. And, you know, Lou, you talked about there being 250 theaters and not knowing how many of those will survive and reopen again. So I guess one question that I have for you is whether you're talking to the public sector and then when you're talking to the private sector, what are you saying that needs to be done to really kind of help get back these theaters and artists get back on their feet, again, kind of in a post-vaccination world? What can we do now?
The reality is that this issue isn't just Chicago. It's not just the United States, it's worldwide. You know, if we think about those initiatives, you know, I've really been pushing hard for that philanthropic community, that these times when there are so many people that need help and there is so much, you know, so many tugging on the hearts of those philanthropic people that are out there and entities that support everything that should be supported, now have culture as another place to, you know, that though they stand behind these cultural institutions, they stand behind that 60-seat theater under a viaduct. You know, it's now time to stand there more than ever and hold fast and keep that heart beating until the vaccine is there and we can open again. On a larger scale, it's the federal government that needs to step in. There are a number of major pushes underway. The Save Our Stages program around the country that is in the current legislation that Congress is considering. We'll see how that flies. But it really takes, you know, it's very difficult to suggest we should be squeezing the city or squeezing the state. You know, we know the financial crisis that we're all under, but this really mandates, in my mind, federal legislation that comes in and supports this cultural infrastructure. You know, if we look back 100 years ago to the pandemic of 1918, it was the Roaring '20s that came right after it. And that was, to a large degree, that celebration that culture led as we came out from hiding under the masks to breathe fresh air again and congregate together. And that's where we really need to be focusing.
Well, and Lou, culture has also been a driver in real estate. Wasn't there an example that I've heard you share in the past about how New York neighborhoods have been created all around culture?
It is no question. You think about cultural development, and I think of culture as economic opportunity. You know, that when you link it to tourism, that's the economic opportunity that I think is enormous. But if you look at New York, you know, it was the cultural community and, to a large degree, the gay community that takes that push out into new areas and starts to develop into areas. So, you know, moving in New York from you know, the city itself into Soho, into Tribeca, into what is now Dumbo, you know, it's that push that was uncharted waters before. The galleries start to pop up, you know, the music scene starts to happen, you know, that community starts to grow and it attracts people. It's that experience, the experiential collector, that we need to keep in our mind. It's why Berlin, from a cultural standpoint, is to a certain degree Mecca for culture, where artists, you know, gravitate to that location because it's supported by the government. You know, so in my head, I think about, you know, I look at the river, I look at our convention center, I look at something like Chinatown sitting in the middle of a line along Cermak, and the huge opportunity that Cermak has to extend our cultural experience. You know, we should be thinking of a new district for tourism, and it should extend from Wrigley Field, in my head, to Cermak, from the river to the lake. I think that if we contemplate a bid for tourism, for example, a business improvement district. I think there's huge opportunity there. But culture is not just theater. It's not just museums. It's restaurants, it's sports. It's everything that allows you to enjoy life. It's our symphonies. It's our opera. It's dance. It's what, it's who we are. That's really culture in my head.
I agree with Lou, and I think you saw Chris mentioned the recovery task force. We focused on one of our initiatives, the neighborhood hubs that become tourist destinations as well, because I think we have never done that intentionally. And that drives, like Lou said, it drives job. It's an economic driver. And I think there's a huge opportunity for us. I just wanted to add one thing on Lou's push for federal help. We started with some conversation with the Biden administration, because I think the brand USA needs some love and some attention, because as we all know, international tourism are worth a lot, and we love bringing them here. And I think we lost some of our brand attractiveness as a country. And I think very optimistic what I'm hearing from the Biden administration, that there will be some focus on that, because people underestimate what kind of big economic driver the brand USA is.
Yes. And Michael, in addition to destination from a standpoint of drawing tourists, but what about in your role at World Business Chicago? Any thoughts on how to bring businesses that from overseas that may want to expand, or that entrepreneur that wants to start up a business, to come to Chicago versus someplace else?
Yes, I mean, I spent the last couple of months already on getting much more what we call vertical focused. It's not like, you bring a company in. No, you have to be vertical. Life science and health, a growing industry. What is our unique position for life science and healthcare? We think we're the next big thing. We're not Boston yet, but we're the next big thing. You look at all the data. If we look at food, I think we have the claim to say we are the food innovation capital of the world. And we have to lift it. We have to market this. 2 years ago, we had roughly 8, and you saw in Crane's article, roughly 80 food companies headquartered in Chicago, now over 300. So in each of these verticals, we have to be very vertical specific. We work with existing business communities to build this pitch story. Then as well pitch with the CEOs of that particular vertical to attract them. I'm very optimistic on that, but we have to be much more aggressive, much more focused. I always like to say, I pitch every day. I think Lou pitches every day. We all pitch, and we have to pitch the city and its benefits every single day. Sometimes we are so focused on all the wrongs, and I'm an optimist. I came to this great country because I'm an optimist, and I think we have to have more of that attitude.
Yeah, Andrew?
Yeah, no, I think what Michael, I just totally underscore that. I think in preparations here, I just have a set of core beliefs about how we're social creatures and yearning for a return. And I think harnessing that in 2020, 2021, 2022 is going to be really critical. And the brand messaging, especially, across generations, really, right? But I think really focusing on a lot on millennials and Gen Z to underscore the value and attractiveness experientially of the central area, especially as we grow further into the labor market and the jobs world that we're in.
Yeah, along those lines, I want to jump in for 1 second to help illustrate the point in terms of numbers. Broadway in Chicago, as an example, went from 1,000 people employed prior to the pandemic down to 14. Those people are sitting at home. I hope they found other jobs. I hope they have some income that they're bringing in. But that's a huge move. When we think about the economic power, and again, I'll use Broadway in Chicago just as that one little example. It's 1,700,000 people we bring through our doors every on an annual basis prior to the pandemic. And the economic output that touches the hotels, the restaurants, the cabs, the Ubers of the world is about $800 million on an annual basis, just from Broadway in Chicago. So that's just a microscopic look at the significant financial impact to the city and everything that's around it. So we think about opportunities like the casino and what impact that will have over time. that's culture. It's those things we do. It's those reasons you get up in the morning. It's what makes us us. And that's where I think, with Michael's support, the team behind him, and the city and state and on the national level focusing the right way. Michael speaks about culture, our image outside the country, and bringing an international community back to Chicago. It was culture that led the ping pong diplomacy with Nixon. It's that soft power, that culture is a very soft way of saying who we are, and allows that conversation to take place between countries and starts to slowly change an image and invite people. And that's where I think Chicago can focus in a big way. But that's a longer move. That's not the short-term play of the 5 to 7 states around us that at the very onset will be the backbone of our recovery.
Thank you. I do want to remind the audience to use the Q&A button if you have any questions. And we do have one question that I am going to read for Michael and Lou. Any prediction on when this person or the community will be able to see live theater in the Loop? What might it be like? So when and what will the new experience be?
Lou should probably talk about theaters. I will talk about the other events.
Do you want to go first?
For me, the watershed moment, because also of my 18-year-old daughter, is Lollapalooza, because it's early August. I think we will have a Lollapalooza in some kind of form physically, not just virtually like this year. So I'm more optimistic. If you look at the vaccination numbers, so might be not as big as previously, but I think we'll have some event type. So I look, even with the mayor's travel plan now, we looked at what can she do next year. I think starting early August, I feel more optimistic. May, June, July, I'm very nervous. So that's how I think. But it will take all of 2021 to really get back to kind of the life we have seen before. But I'm curious I know what Lou will say, but I'll let Lou talk about his particular case.
So from a theater perspective, we are, we can put every calendar we want on the books, but it's ultimately been the virus that dictates. And now it's the virus and the vaccine that dictates. We can mandate our staff to be vaccinated, with a couple of exceptions for religious reasons or ADA reasons. But, it is from our standpoint, we are programming a reopening in the fall. So we're a year away from when we open. We anticipate opening in our smaller venue in October, and our larger venue starting next November. So we also anticipate opening with masks in the theater. With the, all the changes that we've made to create a touchless environment in our space. There are a number of things that I think will help us in the future. This pandemic, we got to get something good out of the damn pandemic. And thinking about, how the knowledge we've gained in preventing the flu spread, about washing our hands, about wearing masks. Wearing masks in Asia is nothing new. And, I think understanding the power of a mask is something that we've all learned through this nightmare. So, but fall is when we look to open.
But I think that's a very good point that Lou brought up, that what are the opportunities we saw as well in the pandemic. I think outdoor dining will stay, that's the city's commitment, will be for us forever. It should be, because I think it changed the landscape of the city. We blocked off streets, and we have the full commitment to continue doing this for the foreseeable future, many years to come, because I think it's a gift to manage outdoor dining in a correct way, both experientially but also for the businesses.
Well, and building off of what you said, Lou, with the mask, I'll tell you, I live in a suburban community outside of Chicago, and our elected officials had a very fierce debate about masks, and ultimately a mask mandate went down. They did not adopt it. And although one of the trustees was talking about how people are just doing it, we don't need to have this mandate, another trustee pointed out that at that meeting, there was, maybe half or more without masks, and so really trying to get people to, wear a mask seems to be a challenge right now in this country. And so one of the questions that I have is, based on many conversations that I've had with some leading economists, they're talking about the fact that it's not necessarily stay-home orders or mandates or lack of mandates, but it's getting people to feel that they are safe, not from a violent standpoint, but from catching a virus. And, let's hope that this is another 1 in 100 year, pandemic, but what if it's not? So my question to all three of you is, again, what can we be doing now to put in place so that this is the safest city from a virus kind of a standpoint, so that people do feel comfortable being able to go to restaurants or to theaters and to other places, both residents being able to go places and visitors coming here. So maybe, I'll start with Andrew from an architect standpoint, from a design standpoint, what can and should we be adopting?
I think that we are, I think some of the revolutions happening in ventilation is really important. I think other like bricks and mortar strategies about about touchless surfaces that Lou mentioned, I think will remain with us. I don't know if we're going to get to a building code revelation for virus code, so to speak. That might be on the horizon. I certainly think designing our spaces to be more resilient in the future, of course, to be more prepared for the next pandemic, if there is one, God forbidding. But I think that's really, really key at the architectural building scale. And then at the urban design scale, I think there is degrees and aspects that we need to talk about with regards to the pandemic, but I think it's mostly about inclusive development and addressing inclusive growth and addressing diversity and inclusion in the public spaces that we imagine, in the new neighborhoods that we imagine across the city and others.
Okay, thank you. Lou, you want to talk about the ventilation or any other systems that need to be put in place?
There are several. One of my initial pushes when this nightmare hit us was to focus heavily on contact tracing. Working with a team out of MIT who was developing a contact tracing system. If we think about contact tracing, the whole concept is containing the spread, finding where it's at, isolating it, and being able to deal with it. That's how we take care of those types of issues. The concept was, in my head, I took their program and twisted it slightly for selfish reasons, to suggest that the contact tracing could be tied to admissions. If we think about the restriction of 10 people or 8 people or 15 people or 50 people, it's all about containing the spread. If we have contact tracing tied to admissions, there's no reason to be concerned. If I've got somebody that tests positive in the third row center of the theater, there's no reason for the person on the second balcony to be that concerned from an alert perspective. It's proximity and duration. So contact tracing tied to admissions sat on the back. The Path Check from out of MIT is a nonprofit foundation that sat on the backbone of Google and Apple's devices. So with technology, thinking about technology in the future, though everyone is concerned about, I'm not sharing my information, government doesn't need to know who I am or where I am. In my insurance company surely doesn't need to know if I don't want them to know about something. So that privacy issue needs to be melded in, and it was in the MIT system. And also thinking about, the physical plants themselves. Fresh air has never been as important to think about how you build and to think about, that pumping in fresh air. That the first place we focused is our air turnover. How fast can we turn it over? How much fresh air can we bring in as quickly as possible? It's not just the touchless side. The HVAC systems are incredibly important. Whoever knew MERV 13, 16, those kinds of numbers would mean anything to theaters, but they're incredibly important to indoor space as the filtration systems that we think through and how we design our theaters. I think code comes about, is going to start dictating fresh air issues. The touchless side, I think, is nice, but the fresh air side is so important, and that air handling, and so I think those kinds of things are going to be living with us and be some of the positive that comes out of the nightmare.
And Michael, before we turn to you, I want to comment, Lou, I published an op-ed in Cranes just a few weeks ago, really advocating not only for a contact tracing app, but one that has cross-jurisdictional application, looking at a model that was adopted between New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Delaware, and Connecticut. And so they have this in place for their residents. So if I lived in New Jersey and I spent a day in New York, and as you suggest, I were to, have some proximity to somebody who subsequently tests positive, although I will not know that it was a person in New York, I will at least get that information that I have been in contact with somebody at close proximity to somebody that tested positive. So I continue to urge our state governments to adopt this technology. University of Oxford study shows that even if there's 15% of a state's residents that adopt this technology, it can cut the spread by 15% and deaths by 11%. So I really, really urge our lawmakers to get this in place. Think, instead of having fragmented, systems that you're all communicating with each other. And again, I think that would bring back that sense of safety, going someplace if you could get that information. And I just know from the research that I've done that there are companies and MIT, they are very conscious with recognizing the privacy needs of this. It is voluntary and it is anonymous. And
if we in a dream world, if we think about your testing, if you're going to be tested, that's the time to sign in to contact tracing, because it's the positives and the negatives that become incredibly important in building that map out in terms of how we move forward. If we think about the litmus paper type of testing, it does the same thing. It allows you don't have to share your information at that point, but it gives you the knowledge you're infected. So if you've got half a brain, you're going to isolate because you care about the rest of the world. And those $1 tests, if we're building it the right way, puts the power in everyone's hands to contain this thing as quickly as possible. So if we think about what happened with theater in Asia and culture in Asia, this isn't their first rodeo. They have had these issues over and over and over. The first thing that comes up are the masks. The next thing that goes simultaneously, contact tracing is in place. We're an embarrassment to the world in how we've handled this.
I mean, two thoughts on this. First, it shows the lack of federal coordination is just stunning. And unfortunately, continues even like this morning discussion with the governor and mayor, the federal government has no system in place how to prove that you're vaccinated in any false proof way. They haven't thought about it. So we have to, on a local level now, come up with a interim paper version. So it's just like Lou said. I mean, other countries have been just much more advanced, and which comes to my second point. The question is, unfortunately, I want to be down. It's not the question if there's a pandemic coming, it's just the question when and how. This will not be the last. If we look at the history of the last 20 or 30 years, but as we in the city, we're very serious about that. We're really building already right now the playbook, what we have learned, what we have done right, what we have done wrong. So we are much more prepared for next time because it will come again. We just don't know the dimension. I'm pretty proud of how I think the city of Chicago and most of the residents have dealt with this pandemic and reacted to it. We looked at some survey. I think now mask compliance in the city of Chicago is close to 90%. It was only 50% like 2 months ago. So we're making the right improvements. We think much more. This will not be the last one. What have we learned? What's the playbook? What are the big changes we all have to do? If it's code-wise, if it's space-wise, if it's air filtration-wise, we need to be prepared for the next one.
And another question has been submitted, and I think, Michael, this will probably be directed toward you. And it talks about the population loss that both the city and the state, has experienced. It brings up issues, like public pension crisis and real estate taxes. But, from a marketing standpoint, have you given thought, or what is the city doing in terms of addressing the population loss and really helping people to understand all of the assets that are here and why they want to live, in Chicago or the Chicagoland area?
I have to admit, you might be surprised. I'm not the person who will solve the pension crisis.
No, I understand that.
So I focus on how can we tell all the great things that happen in Chicago to attract, because like the mayor said, we want to get again to 3 million plus people living in Chicago. My focus is all on the positive things we can tell, because I raised a family. I think Chicago's an amazing place. I meet every day amazing people from all different socioeconomic backgrounds. So I focus on that and want to tell their stories to the world. So that's my focus.
But you do have to address, the challenges. I mean, I'm sure when you're recruiting businesses or talking to the mayor. So how do you approach, let's just call them, some of the warts, on our beautiful city and state. So what is the approach if you can't single-handedly, obviously, address the pension problem, but how do you encourage people to want to stay here and tackle that?
But if you look at the companies who have been successful thriving, if you look at the startup scene, I mean, yes, we have on the pension front financials some big challenges, but the previous administration and now as Life administration, we made good progress on the city level. I only talk about the city in regards to pension. So I think we are on a good trajectory there, even the budget that we approved a couple weeks ago. So I feel on a good place. But take it this aside, look at all the startups, medium and large companies in Chicago who are very successful. If we look at the balance sheets, if we look at the public traded company, if we look at what 1871 has done, so we have so many. So I hear a lot of the challenges, but there have been a lot of success stories. And sometimes I think, and my push was, why don't we focus a little bit more on all the success stories? Why are they successful? Why are food companies coming here? Why they're creating? Why do we have 15% of all startups are people of color or women, 3% in San Francisco? So we have so many great things going for us. And I will always continue focusing on that.
Thank you. Andrew, did you have something you wanted to add?
Yeah, I just wanted to build on what Michael's saying. I think addressing some of the quality of life issues with regards to jobs, schools, investment in underinvested neighborhoods, those are the things I think we need to continue to prioritize and promote in order to address some of the population loss issues. And then, of course, crime, which is an indicator of actually economic opportunity. And so I think advancing those goals are really important.
Thank you. So we only have a couple minutes left, and I know that each of you have done work on the kind of international sphere and have contacts there. So I wonder if you can share with us any specific best practices that you have learned from other cities around the world that Chicago should take into consideration. And Lou, how about if I start with you?
Well, I indicated a couple earlier that, if we look at Asia, who's really done the best job in our side of the economic economy itself, from a cultural standpoint, it's been masks, it's been understanding the environmental systems within venues, and it's been contact tracing. Those are things that were instantly put in place, and they understood how to react. It was amazing to me when you look at Singapore, who's got a government that is not anything like ours. Fortunately, they have a whole other way of thinking about the world where you're told what to do. But we look at the impact that it had. the virus was insignificant in chunks of Asia because there was a national program that mandated how you react to these types of situations.
Thank you. Michael?
I'll go in a different area. I mean, I work a little bit on Berlin because Lou mentioned in Berlin. The thing is, a lot of us, we are very superficial. We look at a city, okay, what is the feeling the city gives me? Berlin was very boring and became very cool. Because it was cool, because of culture, people want to go there, want to move there. And I think we always worried about making Chicago cool. I think Chicago has so many ingredients to be cool. And there's a lot of reasons behind the infrastructure and everything, but I think we shouldn't be walking away from them. We should be much more embracing how cool Chicago is. Excellent.
Andrew?
I think never waste an opportunity to reinvent and push forward. And I think that the economic conditions, we talk about life sciences as an opportunity for Chicago moving forward. I think it's like doubling down on our strengths, and that was a big part of the recovery task force report, just doubling down on our strengths. And I think culture is one of those things absolutely to double down on. I can't think of another really global example that I've been studying too closely, but I'm looking across North America and across the United States against our strong competitors in a way, the coastal competitors, and to realize our advantage culturally there, affordability-wise, the attractiveness of Chicago as a place to relocate to, as all indicators that our regrowth can be successful.
The one last thing I'd like to say before we depart is, density. Density was something that we were all proud of. We could all celebrate. We all loved, living and playing and working, in a walkable city, in a city that you could get anywhere, in a very short period of time. I fear that some of the issues that we've experienced in the pandemic, some of the things that have been exposed during the pandemic, have driven the safety factor into another place, have had us question the type of workspace we operate in, and start to think about, is this the time I make a move to the suburbs? But it's the 24/7 city. It's the energy breeds energy. And the more energy we can build and the more proximity we can harness, I think the better it is for the city.
Yes. Well, I know we're a few minutes past our stop time, so I want to thank everybody, Michael and Lou and Andrew and Chris. I encourage our audience to join us tomorrow at 12 p.m., where we're going to talk about Central City as a livability. As another programming note, when we're talking about kind of looking at best practices, I will share with you that CCAC intends to do a webinar in January with the CEO of London and Partners, talking about the cultural heart of London and how they executed a plan to bring people back to London this past summer, to outdoor attractions. So I think that there are important things that we can learn from all around the world, and we can be a leader and be a place where people point to, so we got to get it right. So with that, gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us today. Really appreciate the wisdom that you shared. We're going to be taking today's conversation and building on it with some work next year, which I look forward to sharing with our CCAC members and broader audience. And so with that, let me wish you stay well, happy holidays, and look forward to keeping in touch. Thank you for joining us today. Have a nice one, everyone.